Garden Report is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
What's up, everyone? This is Noah Dalzell. Celtics just beat the Nets in overtime, second overtime game of the year, first win, 108-104, and this one was pretty much as boring of a game as you could watch early on here. I think everybody was kind of waiting for something to get excited about. Defense was lackluster, energy was lackluster. Celtics fell down 12-0 early on, and that Xavier Tillman starting lineup group looked a little bit lost. So once the bench subbed in, winningest, Payton Pritchard, that certainly helped, and they kind of helped turn things around, and the Celtics ultimately overcame a 14-point deficit to come back and win this game. And just a lot of things to be encouraged by. Obviously, the Brooklyn Nets are not going to be your most formidable competition, but still, no Jaylen Brown. He's out for 4 straight games here with a hip injury, no Lou Kornet. He's dealing with a hamstring strain, and obviously Kristaps Porzingis still out. So you're down 3 rotation guys, and they're still able to plot a win against a Nets team that's honestly been overperforming a little bit. I think Cam Thomas has been one of their bright spots. He showed tonight that he's the real deal. So I think ultimately you look at this game for what it is. It's just another regular season win, and Joe Mazzulla talked post-game about how these are the kinds of games that they won all the time last year, and these are the kinds of games that made them a really good team. And so you have to find ways to pull these out. And down the stretch, Tatum was huge, a couple of big passes. He's been kind of casually dropping a lot of these 30-point performances. Wanted to talk about Payton Pritchard too, because he put up 20 points today, had more points in overtime than any player on the team, 6 points, hit his free throws, had one kind of turnaround post-up shot that bailed them out of a pretty broken possession. And so it just kind of leads you to think, this is a guy who, obviously tonight he closed the game because we're missing 3 rotation players here. But even without that, there have been moments this season where you start to wonder, is this a guy who might close for this team? And so Payton Pritchard, consistently putting up these double-digit scoring performances. And I think the reality is you have Jrue Holiday and Derrick White as your starting backcourt. It's going to take a lot to get either of those guys on the bench. But we've already seen it this season. Versus Indiana, Payton Pritchard closed, Jrue Holiday was on the bench. And so what you're really seeing early on here in November through 10 games, the Celtics are 8-2, but I think the bigger story is that you have 2 guys that have really established themselves as rotation players beyond what I think you could have expected at this point, and that's Payton Pritchard and winningest. And obviously they're in 2 different boats. Pritchard was already in the rotation last year, but seeing him go from a guy who was just playing backup minutes to actually going in and being one of the leading scorers night in and night out. I think he's averaging something like 17 points a game at this point. So he's taking advantage of the fact that there are guys out. He's taking advantage of the fact that other guys are struggling. He's as confident as we've ever seen him. It seems like the green light is just enormous at this point. And Joe Mazzulla talked a little bit about how he's just a 3-level scorer at this point. Here's him talking a little bit about that.
He's got to do it. He's it's funny to say this, but he's actually a really good 3-level scorer. He could shoot threes, he can shoot pull-up twos, and he could create just enough space to get layups off, as you saw tonight. So he's a 3-level scorer. But it's all the stuff. His ball pressure changes the game for us. So he's just a really good, well-rounded basketball player, competitive, nasty.
So I think the question is now when you're talking about Pritchard is, what is the future like for him? And I've been really high on him. I was, always kind of joking around on the internet last year that I think this is a guy who is ultimately going to have an all-star level ceiling. And I don't mean that he for sure will be voted to an all-star game, but I think ultimately that's the potential. Those are the conversations that he's going to be in. And you're really seeing that right now because even on, there's still a lot of talent on this team, and he was one of the most consistent scoring options. And I think we're going to see moments this season where Jrue Holiday or Derrick White take a spot on the bench for a little bit of time, and it's not going to be a consistent thing. I think you still have 2 Olympic guards that are more versatile defenders than him and are just able to do things that he just can't do. But there are going to be games, and we've already seen them a little bit early on here. We had talked about this in the summer, was Payton Pritchard going to be playing overtime periods? He's already played 2 of those, and so he's just showing you kind of the depth of this team. He's showing you what this team is capable of. And they don't rely on just one guy. And so that's the exciting thing. And the other good thing is that you have Jrue Holiday and Derrick White and 2 Olympic players who are also not going to have any issue if they're on the bench down the stretch in favor of Payton Pritchard. That's kind of the benefit of having 2 low ego, no ego guys really. And you don't have to worry about, is Jrue Holiday going to be upset? Joe talked about that today. Jrue Holiday doesn't care what the substitution patterns are. He doesn't care what his role is or what they're asking of him. He's a Swiss Army knife. And so we saw all of that. I think you just continue to rely on this guy. You know, he was 3 for 7 from 3 today. He's been one of the team's most consistent three-point shooters this entire season. And we'll kind of see where the season goes with him. And, you know, there's a lot of questions still about what that opportunity is going to look like in the playoffs. But even as much of a leap that he made last year, we saw a whole other leap right now. And I think that's just going to show you that later in the season, when we're not quite sure exactly what to expect, like, he's always going to be capable of kind of pushing the boundaries of what his supposed limits are.